How to speak Japanese naturally. Number 1. Copy the exact phrase the native speakers use. What does it mean, natural? The answer is frequency, collocation, and context. If a phrase is something that many native speakers would say in a given situation, it means natural. If it's something that most native speakers would never say in a given situation, it means unnatural. Let's use textbooks for examples of unnatural phrases because there's just so many. Genki teaches you this phrase. 朝ごはんを食べませんでした。忙しかったですから。These sentences are grammatically correct and understandable, but they don't sound very natural because they are not something that native speakers would say in this kind of situation. For example, if somebody asks us, 朝ごはん食べましたか? Have you eaten breakfast? We would say something like, 朝ごはん食べてません。忙しかったんで。I haven't eaten breakfast because I was busy. There's many other possibilities, but the Genki version isn't one. And the real-life versions are perfectly grammatically correct and polite, so you wouldn't be in trouble using them. But another way of coming up with unnatural phrases is translating English sentences directly into Japanese. For example, a lot of English speakers say this phrase, 英語を話しますか? Do you speak English? Again, this is grammatically correct and it makes sense, except that native speakers wouldn't say that. I think the most common phrase would be, 英語喋れますか? Do you speak English? Do you know the difference? Well, we tend to use 喋る instead of 話す in this context. But 話せますか is also fine. It doesn't sound very unnatural. But did you notice that we use the potential form 喋れる instead of the plain ます form? 喋ります. So if I translate 英語喋れますか directly into English, it will be something like, can you speak English? Do you know what's going on here? Well, because in English you say, do you speak English instead of can you speak English? English speakers tend to say 話しますか instead of 話せますか. But in Japanese, we would say can you speak English instead of do you speak English? So it will be 喋れますか. And interestingly, many Japanese people say, can you speak English when they speak English because that's how we phrase this in Japanese. So this is one way of ending up sounding unnatural. We are asking the exact same question, but Japanese and English has different ways of phrasing it. So if you want to sound natural, you have to copy the exact phrases that native speakers use. And how do you learn those phrases? Well, from authentic materials and real-life conversations. So you can watch Netflix shows, YouTube videos, reading books, or just having conversations with native Japanese speakers. Now, some people insist that you can learn unnatural textbook Japanese first and then move on to real-life Japanese. But this doesn't quite work very well in many cases, because if you predominantly get input from textbook Japanese as a beginner, textbook Japanese will end up sounding natural to you, even if it doesn't to native speakers. So you continue using textbook phrases because they sound perfectly natural to you. Which, by the way, isn't necessarily wrong because sounding natural isn't always the most important thing when it comes to communication. I like talking about natural Japanese because I'm simply passionate about teaching you real-life Japanese. And this is an important point because forgetting unnatural phrases isn't always easy. And it applies to other languages. There's even a study with Japanese students who learn English. They found that unnatural textbook English sounds natural to Japanese students, even if it doesn't to native speakers. And they say this effect may persist even after they stop learning English from textbooks. And this also applies to my English. There are many textbook phrases I kept using until somebody pointed out, why do you use that? Because I don't hear people actually say it. And I was like, that's right, I don't actually hear people say this. I just kept saying it because I learned it from textbooks, I guess. So it can be quite challenging to get rid of unnatural phrases that you're using naturally. I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm just saying it's usually not that easy. I wish I'd learned natural English from the start. It would have saved me a lot of time. But back then, it was very difficult because we didn't have YouTube or Netflix. But you do now, so get your input from authentic materials. And if you already have textbooks, you don't have to throw them away. You can use them for grammar explanations and learn some verb inflections, for example. Just be sure to get your examples from native content. There's plenty online. And if you want to learn Japanese with me, I will teach you the kind of natural real-life Japanese that real-life Japanese people use, and I will explain grammar using natural examples. So click the link and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuta. And my next tip is use double quotation marks to search for exact phrases. For example, on Google, if you use double quotation marks, you can search for exact phrases. And you can have a very good idea of how those phrases are used or not used in native content. It's not perfect, but it can be quite useful. Now let's try this phrase. マリアさんは自転車に乗ることができますか? Can you ride a bike, Maria? This phrase is grammatically correct and understandable. Again, it's very unlikely that native speakers say this in real life to ask somebody if they know how to ride a bike. Let me search for this phrase on Google. So the top result is a question from a non-native speaker. The second one is a random Facebook page. The third one is actually an English textbook. This one is a dictionary. It's interesting, so we tend to use this phrase to translate an English sentence. Can you ride a bicycle into Japanese? It actually makes sense because when we teach Japanese, they tend to teach something that's easy to understand for English speakers. Their sentences often sound like they are translated from English. So the thing about Google is you don't have a lot of conversational examples because they tend to be written Japanese. So you can use something like Twitter, or should I say X? Let's just say Twitter. Be sure to click latest. And you can see there aren't many examples. So this one is on April 25th. And the next one is 2022. March 2022 and 2021. So on Twitter, this is a very infrequent phrase. So let me try what I think is a much more common version of this. By the way, this is in a context of natural conversation between native speakers, like we are talking, and I want to ask you if you know how to ride a bike. I think most native speakers would say, 自転車乗れますか? Let me search for this. You see lots of examples. And there's many examples. August 1st, July 31st, July 29th. There's actually 2 examples on July 29th, July 22nd, and July 10th. So this phrase is much more common, as expected. And let me try Google again. See, all of the pages are native content. This is a message board, which is more conversational. This is Yahoo Answers, so somewhat conversational. Oh, multiple examples from Yahoo Answers. Another message board. This is a hotel website. It's a blog written in conversational Japanese. This is an article. Okay, this is actually a survey question, so it's perfectly fine to use it in a survey question. And this is a perfectly polite expression you can use with strangers, people who are older than you, because you're using masu. But if I'm writing an article, I would probably insert a particle here and write 自転車に乗れますか? So on websites, you can actually find a lot of examples with the particle. But on Twitter, let me try the version with me on Twitter. August 3rd, July 26th. Yeah, the examples are quite sparse. You can see there are some bots tweeting the exact same tweets. And in hindsight, in conversation, if we really want to use a particle, I think what is a bit more common. And you can see that on Twitter. It's a bit more common than ni. So if you use Google and Twitter, you can have a pretty good idea of if native speakers use some phrases and when they do, in what situations. I often do this in English to check if my phrases are natural, so you can do it too in Japanese. Oh, I also do it in Japanese to confirm if my native intuition is correct or not. Because I'm just one person and I can be wrong. But of course, you have to learn some Japanese before start doing this. So if you want to learn Japanese with me, I will teach you the kind of natural Japanese that real life Japanese people today actually speak. Because as you can see, textbooks teach you a lot of unnatural phrases. So click the link and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuta.